Hello and welcome into episode 22 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins, and we got a great show planned for you today. Andrew's going to break down the latest juice on the recruiting trail. Cormani McClain, we'll talk a little bit about him. Micah Mays as well from the Sunshine State, and then we'll wrap up with Damari Brown there as well. But also number 16, Florida State ranked recruiting class, Mike Norvell and the Florida State Seminoles, 4-0 right now, and they're starting to pick things up on the recruiting trail as well. So we'll do a top to bottom breakdown of the Seminoles and what they got going this year in the 2023 cycle. We'll also talk a little bit about a new era in college football, the transfer portal, but quiet portal season as it's been coined by our own Chris Hummer. We'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll get into our 2-minute drill and we'll get you out of here. But Drew, we are back in action, my friend, today. How are you holding up down there? I know you're braving the weather in Florida.
I'm fortunate on this side of the state. You know, I'm not in the cone of concern. So I'm very fortunate. Fingers crossed. Hope for all my friends and family throughout the state that they stay safe. But man, it looks like it's going to be a nasty one, a bad one. I mean, I'm over here and we're getting tornadoes and that stuff. So everyone stay safe and hopefully we can get through this.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the people in Florida going through this right now, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that throughout the week. But, Drew, let's get to the juice, my friend, and a lot going on, and I know a lot of people are tuned in right now because anytime you slap Cormani McClain's name on a thumbnail, there's going to be a lot of people tuning in. The number 4 player overall in the class of 2023, the number 1 defender in the cycle as well. But it sounds like he's got some things kind of cooking and maybe a decision looming here pretty soon.
And that's kind of the case, something I'd heard from people inside his camp, that Cormani was looking to maybe move up his timeline. And he had never really established a set commitment date or when he would like to shut things down. We kind of thought it would be closer to the early signing period, or this could be a recruitment that could stretch into January, February for that traditional national signing day. But on Monday night, I was up in Lakeland. Lakeland's game got moved because of Hurricane Ian. And I talked to Cormani, and he told me that he thinks a commitment is coming soon. He still doesn't know when, but he would like to shut things down and just kind of focus on one school solely. He also told me just 3 schools in the running right now. Florida, they're the 24/7 Sports crystal ball leader, but then you got Alabama and Miami. Again, talking to people around him, it really sounds like this is a 2-team race, and I know we've been kind of handicapping it as that. I think it's between Florida and Alabama. Gators have done an excellent job. Cormani really enjoyed his time in Gainesville for an unofficial visit during Labor Day weekend when UF beat Utah. But Alabama, they might be, I don't want to say they're in the pole position, but they have the most to gain when Cormani gets up to Tuscaloosa in 2 weeks for an official visit. It'll be interesting to see what Cormani says coming out of that visit. Because I think the Crimson Tide, there's a runway, an avenue there for them to potentially leapfrog the Gators. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. I mean, that's what some people around him say. So we'll see. But that race is tightening, and it could end relatively sooner than we thought for Cormani McClain. He could be committed before we even get to November or December.
Going to have everybody in the Southeast Alabama to Gainesville paying attention on that one. And if you're Alabama, Drew, I mean, you have to like where you're sitting on this one. You're the last school getting an official visit. Texas A&M coming to town. Everything that has transpired over the last year between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher, that is going to be an electric environment. So Cormani McClain, there you have it. 3-team race right now. Alabama, Florida, Miami, all involved. And maybe we'll see a decision here in the next couple of weeks or next couple of months. So we'll keep an eye on that one. But Drew, Miami just coming off of a head-to-head battle with Georgia where Tyler Williams elected to go with the Bulldogs. We know Miami's still looking around for a premier receiver, and that kind of leads us to our next guy. That's Micah Mays, one of the best receivers in the country and a top 40 receiver prospect at that, the 4-star out of the state of Florida, currently committed to Wake Forest, but it sounds like some other teams are knocking.
You know, I love me some Micah Mays. He's one of my favorite prospects in South Florida. He's got 9 catches for 210 yards and 5 touchdowns in 3 games as a senior. We've been wondering why more schools aren't on him. Well, it sounds like they're all making the phone calls and kicking the tires. Micah Mays was in Winston-Salem this past weekend for Wake Forest's overtime loss to Clemson. He said he really enjoyed it, but when I was talking to him, trading some messages, he also revealed that he could potentially visit Miami in the coming weeks. The Hurricanes haven't offered Mays a scholarship, but they're looking for help at wide receiver. You mentioned it, Cooper. They lost out on Tyler Williams. So I think Miami's a school to watch. And then 2 more in the ACC. Keep an eye on NC State. Mays took a secret little visit there last week as well to NC State, met with Joker Phillips. Obviously, the Wolfpack are having a good season, ranked really high. They got a big game this weekend against Clemson. And then Virginia Tech. Mays told me there's been some contact with the Hokies who are looking for some help at the skill positions, just like Miami. And I think there's a chance Micah might take an official visit to VT. So a recruitment to track. There's always a late riser in South Florida, and I think Mays has turned into that guy. And it also sounds like he could be at Florida State this weekend when they host Wake Forest. That all depends kind of on what happens with Hurricane Ian.
ACC battle shaping up for 4-star Micah Mays. We'll keep an eye on him. But we're going to transition now to Florida State, and some good news for Florida State as they've been getting a lot of that, it seems, lately on the recruiting trail. But Drew, you got an update on top 247 cornerback Damari Brown, who looks like he's going to make it to Tallahassee here pretty soon.
Yeah, this is the perfect segue into our team of the week, Damari Brown. This is a Miami legacy, and it's a Miami legacy that was at Hard Rock Stadium this past weekend for that loss to Middle Tennessee State. A lot of people have assumed that Damari's just going to end up at Miami, but I don't think that's the case. He's gone through the recruiting process. He's already taken an official visit to Clemson. Now he's going to get to Florida State in 2 weeks, that weekend of October 15th, when the Seminoles host Clemson. And I think Mike Norvell and that staff has a chance to leave a big impression. Damari, he's always brought up the Seminoles to me, and I kind of got a sense from him that he was waiting to see what they did in year 3 under Mike Norvell. Well, FSU was 4-0. Miami's 2-2. So I think the Seminoles should absolutely be considered a player for one of the top corners in South Florida. This is a guy that had 3 pass breakups against Los Alamitos. We know that's a great team with Malachi Nelson, Mekhi Lemon. He also had 3 pass breakups against Chaminade Madonna Prep a few weeks ago. So he's playing excellent as a senior. I think he's a guy that can come in and play early. And I'll always say this, bet on defensive backs that come out of American Heritage High School. They normally have success on Saturdays. We saw that last week. Jacoby Spells, true freshman, had a pick for West Virginia, pick 6 to seal the game. So Damari Brown, he's one I think we're going to be talking a lot more about, Cooper, in the coming weeks, as he's going to be a guy a lot of people gravitate towards.
So much juice. If you love the juice from Andrew Ivins, make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you also throw us a like and smash that subscribe button. Drew, great job on that, my friend. But the reason most of you came here, I'm guessing, is the breakdown of Florida State, our team of the week, coming off their 44-14 complete game against Boston College. Florida State's been a hell of a year, Drew. We've talked a lot about them throughout the offseason, what they were going to have to go through in that first third of the season. Here they are sitting 4-0 right now, and Mike Norvell is starting to gain some steam on the recruiting trail. Florida State with the number 16 class in the country per the 24/7 Sports composite team rankings. That's good enough for number 3 in the ACC, but this seems like a team that's got some meat left on the bone as well. 7 players in the top 247. Andrew, we'll start with you. What have been your biggest takeaways so far this cycle for Mike Norvell and Florida State?
I think my big takeaway is how well Mike Norvell has positioned himself to have success. We know what happened last cycle right at the early signing period with them losing Travis Hunter to Jackson State, and one of the biggest surprises ever in the world of recruiting. So Florida State took a little bit of a different approach in the 2023 cycle. And, maybe they weren't pushing to get kids committed, but they're building out those relationships, and they were setting the stage where if they won games, they would get some commitments. Well, FSU, like I said just a few minutes ago, they're 4-0. We know that they've done that. And recruiting is as good as it's ever been under Mike Norvell. And I think that's really notable because right now, when you look around the state, when you look at Billy Napier and the Florida Gators, they're 2-2. You look at Mario Cristobal and the Miami Hurricanes, they're 2-2, coming off an embarrassing loss to Middle Tennessee. So I think FSU, there's a chance for them to kind of stamp this as, hey, we are the team to beat in the state of Florida. And it's been a while since we have said that. So I just think it's impressive, the strategy that Mike Norvell and his staff took. I know me and you, Cooper, on this show, we kind of scratched our heads a little bit. Why are they being so conservative? Why aren't they in South Florida? Well, they maintained course, stuck to the plan, and now look at them, 16 in the rankings. And I think in the class of 2024, they're also number 2 in those rankings. There's a lot of pieces I like there. So I think right now, it looks good for Mike Norvell, and that arrow is trending up. Last thing I'll say as well, Mike Norvell has been very successful in the transfer portal, and I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to keep leaning on that. So it'll be exciting to see what they can add this upcoming winter. Cooper, your big takeaway, what do you think?
I like what they've done. 16 players committed in this class. Like I alluded to earlier, 7 of them in the top 247. They have had to go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with some of the bigger teams across the country, not only in the southeastern region, but in the state as well. Where a team like Florida and Miami, both teams have had momentum throughout the offseason. Now you're sitting here, Florida State at 4-0, both Florida and Miami at 2-2. And I think Mike Norvell has put his team in a position to capitalize. But some of the guys, you look at Hakeem Williams, highly contested recruitment. Drew, I know between me and you, we think of Hakeem Williams as arguably one of the best playmakers in the country. So to be able to go toe-to-toe with Texas A&M, hold off Miami there, and win that recruitment, I think says a lot about the momentum that Florida State is building. You look at some of these other guys as well. Lucas Simmons, a priority for Florida in their backyard. You look at Blake Nicholson from the state of California, Oregon, a priority for Blake Nicholson. And for Florida State to go all the way out there and win that and get a top 247 linebacker like Blake Nicholson and big Roderick Kearney, who we've talked a lot on this show, Alex Atkins, tip of the cap to him. So I think the top tier talent acquisition has been impressive, but what's been more impressive to me is the way that they've done that. And I respect that from Mike Norvell and his staff, especially when it would have been easy coming off a year when you lost the number 1 player in the country to Jackson State, to really get into a situation where you're being a little bit more conservative throughout that evaluation process. Kudos to them and the job that they've done. And I don't think they're done yet. But Drew, let's transition now to some of the top headliners. We're going to highlight 5 guys here in this class. And what we like to do typically during this segment, if you haven't seen this before, is compare these guys to some players in the NFL. And Drew, I want to start with the guy at the top, Hakeem Williams, and a guy that we're a huge fan of, 6'3", 200 pounds, dynamic, multi-sport athlete. We talk about the basketball background. You love to talk about the swimming background as well. A guy that was, I believe, 21 plus on the GPS as well. So he can move. He's a big physical body. I believe he was on your freaks list as well. But Drew, I'll let you take this one from here.
Yeah, and I've struggled with a comp for Hakeem Williams. The one I've had long on his profile is N'Keal Harry, the former Arizona State wide receiver who was drafted in the first round. Hasn't really had much success on Sundays, but I think people forget that he's a guy who was a 2-time All Pac-12 wide receiver, had back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving for the Sun Devils. So I like that. And Cooper, I peeked at the notes. I think your comparison's super interesting for Hakeem Williams because it's a perennial All-Pro you got listed for him. So why don't you share that with us?
It should definitely raise some eyebrows, but that's Julio Jones. And listen, I know what that sounds like when you compare a 17, 18-year-old athlete to the likes of an all-pro like Julio Jones, one of the best to ever do it. But I see that in Hakeem Williams in terms of a top 32 player that is just really scratching the surface of what he's going to become. We mentioned the multi-sport background. You look at Hakeem Williams still developing physically, but this is a very powerful, explosive player who utilizes his frame exceptionally well. And I think a guy that's only getting better right now. So Florida State in a great position to bring in a guy and a talent like Hakeem Williams that is not only going to change that receiver room for the positive, he's going to change that offense as well. So I think this is going to be probably the best weapon that Mike Norvell has had at his disposal since he's been in Tallahassee. And if you're a Florida State fan, you got to be geeked up right now because Hakeem Williams is pretty different. But Drew, another guy that we've really kind of been a highly touted guy for us throughout the process, and an international prospect at that, originally from Sweden. That's top 247 offensive lineman Lucas Simmons. And me and you especially have been really high on the athletic upside here. But is there a guy that he reminds you of that plays on Sundays right now?
Well, I mean, this is probably a little lofty of a comparison, but I jotted down Ronnie Stanley here, who's another prototypical left tackle. And I think when you look at Lucas Simmons, that's what he is. Now, he's a little bit bigger than Ronnie Stanley was at this stage in his development, but Lucas has an 82-inch wingspan, and he's just a really, really good athlete. What sucks is, with this Hurricane Ian, I was scheduled to see Lucas Simmons come and play in Miami. He was going to play in Miami-Dade County on Friday night. Not sure that's going to happen, but when you look at Florida State's class and what they've done, we've talked at length, Cooper, about Alex Atkins and Mike Norvell rebuilding that offensive line room. And Lucas Simmons, when we talk traits, length, and all that stuff, he might have the highest ceiling out of any of those guys. And I'm excited to see what him in that. I think it's probably going to take some time for him to develop. And I know people have brought up Lucas a little bit older for his grade, just making that switch coming over as an international prospect. But to me, man, this is a guy that it checks off every box you want as a potential franchise left tackle. And I think if you're Florida State, you hope after a year or two, he can anchor that left side. And then whoever the quarterback is, they don't have to worry about getting hit. They can step up in the pocket. But no, Lucas Simmons covers a ton of grass just with his wide stance. And then he's got those arms to fend off those elite edge rushers that you find in the ACC.
When we saw him in the beginning of the year at the Under Armour Combine in Miami, I think that's kind of when the perception started to change around him as a prospect, Drew. And you and I talked about it, but he is a long reactionary athlete. And a lot of people will say, okay, what is a reactionary athlete? Well, that's quickness, agility, balance. And those guys are really hard to find. It's hard to find a 6'7" guy with functional athleticism, nonetheless, a very good athlete at that size. So I think that's the one thing that has stood out above the rest when you're looking at Lucas Simmons, the prospect, and trying to figure out, okay, what is this guy going to be 2 to 3 years from now? I think he needs to improve at the point of attack. I think right now that is the biggest area of his game that needs focus. But in terms of the feet, the agility, the pure athleticism that he has at his disposal, that's God-given. That's a lot of stuff you can't teach. So if you're Alex Atkins and Mike Norvell, these are the guys, if you can go out and continue to find guys like this, and it won't be easy each and every class, you're going to put yourself in a position to build an offensive line that can really compete in the late part of the year. So Lucas Simmons, a guy that we love, the comparison that I had for him, Nicholas Petit-Ferrer, a guy that played his football in Berkeley Prep in Tampa and was pretty comparable in terms of maybe not from a height weight standpoint, but in terms of where they were in their development. I think Nicholas Petit-Ferrer was a guy that needed to improve physically, and I think he did when he went to Columbus, third-round draft pick of the Tennessee Titans this past season. But Drew, another guy, Keldrick Falk, from the state of Alabama, a top 247 edge or defensive lineman. It just kind of depends how you want to categorize him. But I kind of love this guy's length. He's got a basketball background. He moves very well. He's very sudden at the point of attack. I think he's got more pop in his hands than a lot of people give him credit for, and he plays with power. I like his developmental upside. I think this is a sneaky good get for Florida State, and the comparison that I had for him was another third-round pick, but Myjai Sanders out of Cincinnati, who got drafted by the Arizona Cardinals this past year, and a guy that turned a lot of heads at the Senior Bowl. But I like Keldrick Falk a lot, man.
Well, I think when you look at this Florida State class, it's ranked number 16. I mean, where are they getting better? It's super obvious at the point of attack, and it's guys that are protecting the quarterback and guys that can go after the quarterback. And Keldrick Falk, man, I had a chance to see him when I was up in Tallahassee for that Seminoles showcase. I mean, he's a big, functional athlete, and you think when you see him, he can be, is he strictly an edge guy? Does he have to rush from the inside? I don't really know, but I think you just take him and you kind of figure it out later. I struggled with a comparison here, Cooper. I thought maybe, hey, let's just try to tie this into Florida State. How about Janarius Robinson, the former edge player for them? But I think this is a monster pickup for the Seminoles. When he committed, I think it was there in July, or maybe it was even in June. A lot of people on the national scale didn't read much into it, but this is someone I think that should be playing in the SEC. So if you're Mike Norvell and Florida State, you get a SEC edge rusher committed. I mean, that's a huge win. But no, he also plays a little offense. I mean, he checks off a lot of boxes for us. So big fan of Keldrick Falk.
premium position. Edge rushers are difficult to find. So to be able to go into a place like Alabama, pull one of the better ones out of the state of Alabama, big win for Florida State. But let's go to California now. We're going all the way to the West Coast. And Blake Nicholson, one of my favorite guys in Florida State's recruiting class, top 247 linebacker, the number 11 linebacker in the cycle in 2023. I love this kid. Three-phase player, a guy that does it all. Wildcat quarterback, plays receiver, plays running back, plays linebacker. He's all over the place, but he is a human eraser, and he kind of fits the mold of a modern NFL linebacker. So a speed and space game, you have to have athletes that can play in space and also cover. So it's a run and cover game as well. I love Blake Nicholson. Hats off to Derek Ray, the general manager, a good friend of mine, had the West Coast connections, came over from Oregon State. I know he played a big part in that, but this was a big one. And, I mentioned it earlier, Drew, but Oregon wanted this guy. This was a big priority in the way Dan Lanning has been recruiting. You think that this would be more of a West Coast lean. So for Florida State to go all the way out to the West Coast, pick up a guy like that, that is a big deal. The comp I had for him, Logan Wilson, a guy who played his football in the Mountain West at Wyoming, certainly off to a great start in his career with the Cincinnati Bengals. But if I'm a Florida State fan, man, I got to be jazzed up about this one too, Drew.
Yeah, my comp, if you watch this show, which you should every week. I used this last week for Tony Rojas in Penn State's class. But what about Drew Tranquill, the former Notre Dame linebacker, now with the Chargers, a guy that can get sideline to sideline. Cooper, you said it, new age, second-level defender that can cover, that can play in space and knows what they're doing. What I like about Blake's tape is you turn it on, like the first 2 minutes is just him catching passes as a wide receiver. So, that's always a good sign. But FSU, they seem to have figured it out. This past year, getting Tatum Bethune out of the transfer portal from UCF. He has been awesome for the Garnet and Gold. And I think, Blake Nicholson's a little bit different. But when you think about Tatum and someone that finds different ways to impact the game and flies around to the football, I think that's a similar mold in the type of prospect. And Cooper, you mentioned wanting him. Blake was in Eugene a few days before he announced to the Seminoles. He was there at Oregon for the game against BYU, which was a huge win. So, man, we talk about Mike Norvell beating Texas A&M for Hakeem Williams, and then they go head-to-head with Dan Lanning in Oregon for a kid on the West Coast. I mean, those were two monster wins, and I know it gets lost in this college football season with everything going on. But if that happened in like March or February, everyone would have been celebrating like crazy. So that's an awesome statement for them.
That's a big deal. So we go from Alabama to California. Now we're going to go all the way back to the East Coast. We're going to go to North Carolina for our last headliner. That is KJ Sampson or Keith Sampson, whatever you want to call him. But I love this kid, high motor guy that I think can play in multiple fronts, can play as a three technique. I love his quick twitch, power, explosiveness off the line of scrimmage. He plays with a really high motor. And the more you watch this kid, similar to Keldrick Falk, these are guys for us, Drew, in terms of how much credibility and how much we've talked about these guys. I don't think we've talked them up enough, but I really like what Florida State is doing up front. The NFL comparison I had for him, another third-round former draft pick of the Baltimore Ravens, and that is going to be my guy, Justin Madubuike. I hope I pronounced that all right, out of Texas A&M, but a guy who was certainly an impactful player in the SEC. I think KJ Sampson can have a pretty similar type of impact at Florida State, and I really like this guy. I think people are sleeping on him, Drew.
Well, there's a former 24/7 sports reporter that calls North Carolina, or just the Carolinas in general, D-line heaven. So if you're always going to get a big frame pass rusher, you want to go into North or South Carolina. And Keith Sampson, huge win for the Seminoles. I remember reading back during the summer months, this is a kid that was playing tight end for his 7-on-7 team or for his high school at a few 7-on-7 tournaments. No, Cooper, I love that comparison to Justin Madubuike. I didn't come right down with one, but I think he's going to be a guy that should be able to play right away for Florida State. He can get in there for 20 or 30 snaps, and he was someone that committed to them relatively early at a junior day. A lot of people were wondering, is he going to stick? And look, he has. Florida State's now 4-0. You would think that he's going to sign with the Seminoles. So that was a big pickup as well.
We're not a heavily penalized show, but I got to throw a Petagna flag right there. Justin Matabike. Drew, I struggle with it myself. That's okay. We're still working through it. 25 minutes in, our first penalty. That's all right. But, Drew, that does it for the headliners. Now, the favorite part of this segment for me, the more love guys. Which guys need more love? Which guys do we not talk about enough? And I love this segment. And, Drew, me and you, we both had the same two guys. We went in separate different directions, but these were two guys that I think stood out amongst the rest. I'm going to let you go first.
Jabril Rawls, he was a cornerback that I saw at the Seminole Showcase, and I remember writing that day. So that was FSU's elite camp there at the end of July. I noted Mike Norvell was following this guy around through drills, and then sure enough, a few days after that camp, Jabril Rawls commits to the Seminoles. And man, I watched one of his games a few weeks ago against Milton, which has Emory Williams, the Miami quarterback commit, and then Raymond Cottrell, the Georgia top 247 receiver commit. I thought Jabril was the top player on the field. He's been doing it in all three phases on Friday nights here. I think it's a really good find for the Seminoles and a really, really good take. He's a long, twitchy athlete. He's got a punt return touchdown. He's got a kick return touchdown in 5 games as a senior. He's also got 22 tackles, over 230 yards receiving. He's just doing it all. And Mike Norvell, from what I've understood, he's looking for just good football players that want to be at Florida State. And to me, Jabril Rawls, he checks that box off. I could see this guy going there, outplaying his ranking, and being a member of that 2 deep for 3-4 years. So I really, really like him. Cooper, I know you like him as well. I think you were trading text messages with me about him. Who is the guy that you don't think is getting enough love?
No, I like that kid a lot and really glad that you picked him. But mine is Darren Goldie Lawrence. And, this is a kid from Seminole in Florida, in-state prospect. Drew, I got to see him in the early part of the year at a 7-on-7 tournament in New Orleans at Battle. 6'2", 190. Kind of reminds me of another guy in this class, Aiden Williams, who continues to turn heads, the Ole Miss commit. And when you look at both of these guys, it's not one trait that really stands out or separates them from the rest of the pack. They just know how to get open, and they know how to make themselves available. And Darren Goldie Lawrence, I think, understands how to utilize his frame. He's really strong at the point of attack. I love his temperament. I love his disposition, and I love the way he attacks the football. He has a really good understanding of leverage as a route runner, and I think this is going to be a guy, Drew. We talk about guys outperforming their projections. This is a guy, Darren Goldie Lawrence, that I know me and you have talked about for quite some time, but you start to factor him in with guys like Hakeem Williams, and you start to think, okay, I really like what Florida State's got going here.
I was talking with someone in a recruiting department a few weeks ago at a Power 5 school, and we were just going through the evaluating process. He turns to me, he goes, hey, you want guys that have produced on Friday nights. Those are the guys that come in and have an impact. And when I look at Darren Goldie Lawrence, he's a guy that's done it for 3 years at Sanford Seminole, which is in the highest classification in the state. Darren missed a few games. He had to serve a little suspension. I think he got into it with a referee verbally during the spring. They have spring practices in Florida. Well, in his first game back, he scored 4 touchdowns that night. He should have had a 5th. It was called back. I just think he's someone with an edge to him. It's a really good take for Florida State. I think what also stands out about Goldie is he can play inside or outside. So tying that back in with the whole Mike Norvell strategy, Jabril Rawls, Darren Lawrence, 2 guys that are just good football players that I think are going to thrive at FSU with the culture that Mike Norvell has created there.
Hey, you got to mix it up every now and then. I like that. Darren Goldie Lawrence. Hey, Hakeem Williams, his future teammate, already honorary Oyster Boyz. I think we got a spot for Darren Goldie Lawrence on there as well. Drew, when you look at this class, and, I think this is a part of the segment we got to nitpick a little bit, but is there one part of the class that says, okay, I have a little bit of concern here or maybe some question marks on how this is going to play out over the next couple months?
I do. And I think if you look at this group, where's the quarterback, right? They had Chris Parson committed for the longest time. We're flirting with Brock Glenn. They end up not getting him. Now they don't have a quarterback committed. And there's not really anyone out there that I think you would consider a flip target. Emory Williams, the kid from the Panhandle at Milton High School that's committed to the Miami Hurricanes. Florida State went and saw him throw. They have yet to offer him. That doesn't mean they won't at some point down the line. We still got 3 months before that early signing period. But I kind of want to know what they're going to do at quarterback. And I think Mike Norvell is more than likely going to go into the transfer portal Louisville. He's had success with Jordan Travis, who has one more year left. We saw what Tate Rodemaker was able to do against Louisville, but you want to keep restocking that room. So interested to see what they'll do there. But I'll say this, Luke Kromenhoek, who they have committed in the class of 2024, Cooper, I know you're on the rankings calls. You see my notes. I love that kid. I had a chance to see him last month. He played down here in the 305. And I think he is a special talent. I think he's someone that's going to rise in the rankings for us. I think a ton of schools are going to try to flip him. Last year, he had to sit behind Holden Gerner, the Elite 11 finalist. Holden led his team to the state title, so Luke ended up playing defensive back and wide receiver. Well, now he's a quarterback. In his first 4 starts, he is 2-2, completing about 66% of his passes, 7 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. He's also ran for 130 yards. I love this kid. Tons of upside. I think he's a natural back there, and he can let it rip. So not that concerned, but I still want to know, who are they going to bring in to help out that quarterback room?
Something about those quarterbacks down there in Savannah, Drew, that you like about those guys. You're big on Holden Geriner. Talked about him maybe playing and seeing the field early for Auburn. Now Luke Kromenhoek and Florida State, as you mentioned earlier, are already off to a very hot start with a top 5 ranked recruiting class in 2024. I'm going to go with the secondary here, and I'm kind of reaching a little bit, but you got 2 redshirt juniors on the back end. You got Akeem Dent, you got Jamie Robinson as well, who's played very well for Florida State this year at times. And you know, I look at what Florida State's done in the secondary, and I like Jabril Rawls a guy that we've talked about. Kenton Kirkland back there as well. I also believe Quindarius Jones will find a place and a home in the secondary. But you talk about it, Drew, from maybe a 30,000-foot standpoint. If you had a guy like Damari Brown, you're feeling a lot better about that secondary. But quarterback and defensive back, I think 2 positions that Florida State, with the number 16 ranked recruiting class right now, if they're looking to shore up over the next couple months before early signing day, I think take a hard look at both of those positions where Florida State could try to finish strong. But Drew, to wrap this segment up, I like this one as well. I like all these segments that we've been doing, but of the guys still left on the board for Florida State, Mike Norvell, which one, in your opinion, would be the biggest splash and maybe the most impactful?
Well, I think producer Jesse just tossed one out there for us, Damari Brown, the cornerback. That'd be a huge statement, I think, for Florida State in a cycle where they've had a bunch of big battles and a bunch of wins. But the guy I have written down here, the guy I have circled, is Jordan Hall, top 247 defensive lineman out of Jacksonville. He's a kid that Florida State has been on longer than anyone else. I consider him a Georgia lean at this point in the process, but he keeps showing up in Tallahassee. So can Florida State get this thing across the finish line? I think that would be a monster for them, because we talked about it. We love what they're doing at the point of attack, more specifically so on the defensive side of the ball. And the name of the game these days is getting after the quarterback. Jordan Hall is someone that can do that from the inside. You pair him with what they already have committed. We didn't even talk about Lamont Green Jr., who I saw a few weeks ago. He's a legacy that's committed, more of an edge rusher. I think that would be a nice addition for FSU. And then I want to see what they do in the transfer portal. Jermaine Johnson, Jared Verse, Mike Norvell, and that staff have had a ton of success. So I think you also got to keep an eye on that. I know we're just talking recruiting here, but this is talent acquisition. And the transfer portal is part of the formula and the model that FSU is using right now.
I'm a huge fan of Jordan Hall. We just got off a rankings call. You know, maybe I'm a little bit bullish on him, but I think he's a guy that could kind of work into that top 40 conversation. Not a lot of guys his size that can move the way that he does. Two-way prospect as well. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Jaheim Otis. I know, Drew, you're probably surprised by that one, but I like him a lot. But for me, I'm going to go on the offense line of scrimmage. I'm going to go with top 247 offensive lineman DJ Chester and a top 60 prospect for us, one of the better offensive tackles in the country. LSU right now, one of the teams to beat. Florida State right there in the mix as well. And you think about what Florida State has done on the offensive line. You think about Lucas Simmons. You think about Roderick Kearney. If they are able to add another top 247 talent and a guy like DJ Chester, they will be cooking. And I think that is the biggest thing for a Mike Norvell Florida State team, is to improve at the point of attack. You mentioned Jordan Hall. I'm over here mentioning Chester. I think there's a lot of room for that team to improve in the trenches. And that's the way you do that. I love those guys right now. They got to hold on to them. Lucas Simmons, Roderick Kearney. But if you can add this guy, I love DJ Chester's position versatility. I think he can play tackle or guard, and it makes you so much more flexible as a program. up front. But Drew, that's about all we got on Florida State. Before we wrap up with them, any final thoughts on this class?
No, I think me and you were really hard on Mike Norvell early on in this cycle, and he has silenced critics. I like this group for Florida State. Again, you look at it, it's only 16 names, but if you start putting pieces together, Luke Kromenhoek, the quarterback in the class of 2024, I think Mike Norvell and those guys think he is a 5-star type of talent. Of course, anyone is going to say that when they have someone committed, but that's primary part of the reason why they don't have a 2023 arm. And I also think with what the transfer portal has offered and their hit rate right there, I mean, if you are Florida State, you got to feel good about life right now. And I think a few months ago, a lot of us were wondering which way would this season go? The fork in the road. Is it going to be, hey, Mike Norvell's out of town, or does he have this thing headed in the right direction? And I think he does have it headed. Obviously, in a few weeks on deck, Wake Forest at home at NC State, then they get Clemson. But man, they win those games. You're talking CFP conversation.
I think they finally found some smooth air for the first time under Mike Norvell, and I think they need to take advantage of it, and I think they've been doing that to this point. I think Hakeem Williams is a program-changing type of talent. I think if you continue to add and stack guys, I think they've been very smart and very, I would say, specific with their takes with guys that fit their program, guys that maybe not on the front end would heap a lot of praise. But we talked about Darren Golden Lawrence today on the show. We talked about some of the guys that they've added. Jabril Rawls on the back end in their secondary, also going through junior college as well with Jaden Jones. I think is going to be a guy that's going to be able to contribute for them day one. So I like what Mike Norvell and his staff have been able to do, but I think they've been the beneficiary of winning football games. So if they can continue to do that, you just mentioned the next 3 games that they had, the schedule is going to toughen up a little bit and get a little bit more difficult. If they come out of the other side of this next 3-game stretch still undefeated, I think Mike Norvell and Florida State have another step to take in terms of what they've been building on recruiting. But that is it for Florida State. Your team recap, team of the week right there, the number 16 ranked recruiting class in the country, number 23 ranked team per college football right now. They'll face number 22 Wake Forest this weekend. But there you have it for that. And Drew, it's time for us to let a 4-minute offense. We're not in the 2-minute drill yet, but a little bit of 4-minute offense. We're already 37 minutes into the show, my friend. So you know this one's going to be a little bit up tempo. But quiet portal season. I didn't know about this until about 48 hours ago. I see an article from our own Chris Hummer. Trey Scott hits me on Slack and he says, hey, I want you to read this article, read up on this, and get your thoughts. So basically, I'll break it down. The NCAA has passed legislation before the season. It kind of fell through the cracks, but there are 2 periods now at windows in which players can transfer. And one is a 45-day period that starts in the first week of December as soon as the college football playoff attendees are announced. Another one is a 15-day period that will be from May 1st to May 15th, which will be after the spring practice period for most programs. So, Drew, a lot going on, but I believe it's more relevant right now because we're seeing players who would highly recruited guys in some situations redshirt. We're at that time of the year where it's the 4th, 5th, 6th week of the season coming up here, and now players have a decision to make because if they 4 games, let me try to explain this. If they play 4 games and not 5 games, they can keep their eligibility and not exhaust a year. So that's why you see some instances of a guy like Terrence Lewis at Central Florida, Gary Bryant at USC, of these guys redshirting, not playing this year, and then they're going to enter the portal as we expect after the season. But Drew, a lot to be made on this. We're going to talk a little bit about Luther Burden, Evan Stewart, some of the guys, most highly rated players in last year's cycle, where they are right now. But just your overall thoughts on how college football is changing, how this new wrinkle is really kind of impacting the way some of these players go about their decision to enter their name in the transfer portal.
Well, I think this is the landscape right now. I mean, you mentioned Terrence Lewis. Terrence Lewis is out there tweeting out clips of him from a UCF practice. And, you're like scratching your head. Why is he doing this? Well, he can't say he's in the transfer portal, but he wants people to know that he's in the transfer portal. So that's why you're going to do it. I just think it's another element. They had to establish some windows here. It just sucks at some of these schools, guys that are shutting it down early. Maybe in the case of Terrence Lewis, I mean, he wasn't playing for UCF, but some of these big names out there that have just decided to mail it in. Hey, it's not going the way I want it to, or I want to save my year of eligibility. Then next thing you know, they're essentially signaling, hey, that I am going to transfer. So it's just another added element in this whole thing. I kind of have touched about it with some other people. I think JUCO recruiting's at an all-time high right now, because if you're looking for a veteran player, I mean, there's no transfer portal. So if you need a veteran corner or a veteran tackle and you want them in for spring football, well, you could, sure, yeah, you could tamper, but the only legal way to ensure that you're going to get a serviceable body is to hit those junior college ranks. So it's just something different, and it's here to stay with these rules. Like, I don't think this is going anywhere. And I think we live in this reality where one kid sees some kid do it, and then everyone's going to do it. I announce my top 5. Cooper, you got to announce your top 5. So, once kids can realize that, hey, if I should take a red shirt, that means I'm going to the portal. Everyone else is probably going to do it, or a lot more people are going to do it.
All right, well, let's talk about that piggyback impact for a second, because this week a guy that turned some heads and made some headlines was former 5-star Missouri player Luther Burden, a guy that we're really high on coming out. But this was a guy that seemingly was very frustrated after the loss to Auburn this past weekend, scrubbed his social media, very similar to what we came on this show and talked about with Kayshon Boutte in LSU. A couple weeks later, the waters have calmed for Kayshon Boutte in Baton Rouge. But now we've seen this with Luther Burden, and since then he's come back and preached patience and to tell Missouri fans everything is going to be okay, basically paraphrasing there. But Drew, this is kind of the second time we've seen this. We've seen this a little bit with Evan Stewart liking tweets about the inefficiency of Jimbo Fisher's offense. But, what complicates things here is the NIL dynamic. A lot of these guys are in situations where they're tied up to money, and you wonder, how is this going to play out in the future if these guys have already accepted financial trade-off or whatever it is from some of these collectives or third-party collectives, and they're tied to this school, but there's obviously this frustration bubbling up on the field.
I mean, the first thing that jumps out to me, right, with the Luther Burden stuff, and I think he's just a frustrated 18 or 19-year-old. And when I watch Missouri play this season, I've seen a few of their games. I mean, the Tigers were like finding ways to get him touches. I mean, he's taking wildcat snaps. There's end around screen passes. Like, they were trying to keep him as involved as they can. I think he's just a little bit of frustrated about where he's at. But when I look at this, I mean, if you are a Missouri booster or an alum and you're paying into one of these collectives and you're giving Luther Burden all this stuff, and the kid doesn't like it, so now he enters the transfer portal. I mean, would I ever, sign up to give money to another player if I'm a Missouri fan? So that to me is what kind of sucks about this. I mean, we talk about parity in college football. I mean, Missouri, like, are they ever going to get another 5-star if Luther Burden leaves? Because I think it's going to be pretty difficult for Eli Drinkwitz and that athletic administration to come and ask for it. So that's what's concerning to me. That's what sucks. I also think, with these guys liking tweets, scrubbing media, that plays into what they're seeing at the level ahead of them with the NFL right now. I mean, look how many big time wide receivers moved around or threatened trades. Deebo Samuel wanted this, Tyreek Hill, he leaves, he's in Miami. I mentioned it, Cooper, I dropped my top 5. You got to drop your top 5. We just live in this era where everything is blown up on social media. So I think this is here to stay. And I don't have an answer for it, but it's just, it's super interesting with the NIL. Maybe it comes out, how do you structure these contracts? What do those NIL deals and contracts say?
Yeah, I think you just have to be willing, especially if the university or if you're Eli Drinkwitz in this situation, to kind of accept the terms of where you are right now with Luther Burden and the type of talent that you have within your program. And you understand that this comes with the territory of the new landscape of college football. When you sign guys like this, NIL is involved. It can sometimes get complicated. We've seen this already in Baton Rouge. And like I said, things have seemed to stabilize there. I expect that to happen in Missouri as well. But to me, nowadays, scrubbing your social media is some type of leverage play in a passive aggressive way to try to say, hey, I'm frustrated with my situation, instead of taking responsibility and accountability for the actions or whatever it is, or the way that you've played. But, it should be noted that Luther Burden, as Eli Drinkowitz said, suffered an injury in the second quarter of that game and was only back there to receive punts for the second half. So in terms of the limited participation there, you can do with that information what you will. But this is certainly going to be something that I don't think is going away anytime soon. And I think we can expect to see this in the future. Luther Burden, Evan Stewart. I mean, you could kind of see it before, so we'll see what happens there. But Drew, now our 4-minute offense is done. It's time for our 2-minute drill, and we're going to get through it pretty quickly. But you're in the middle of it right now, and I know the rest of the state, you're kind of out of it, but in it at the same time. But Hurricane Ian, obviously, we've seen the impact of this hurricane already as it's coming ashore. Category 4 hurricane hitting South Florida. But Drew, just the impact and maybe some of the implications that you have seen in the past from some of these storms and how they impact football games.
It's going to be a weird weekend. I mean, you got the University of Florida. They're playing on Sunday. UCF, they moved their game against SMU to Sunday. We've seen South Carolina move their game up. USF's going to play ECU in Boca Raton. The one I got circled is what happens in this NC State game trip to Clemson. A couple of years ago, I was at the rain game between Deshaun Kaiser and Deshaun Watson, which was awesome. But NC State, wasn't too long ago, 2016, they played in the middle of Hurricane Matthew. The Wolfpack won that game 10-3. There was one touchdown scored. It was off of a blocked punt. If anyone remembers Brian Kelly, man, he kept trying to throw the football. I think, 16 of 40 passes were completed in that game for 95 yards. The teams were a combined 3 of 29 on third down conversions. It was ugly football. I think there's a chance you're going to see that this weekend if they do indeed play at Clemson. I would tell you to take the under, but it's already dropped at BetMGM from 40.5 or 45.5 all the way down to 40. And I would assume that's going to keep sinking. My big thing is, man, everyone stay safe out there. This hurricane's going to mess up the whole high school football season in the Sunshine State. We talked about people shuffling their games around. Miami Dolphins opening up their indoor practice facility so FIU could practice. I mean, it's cool to see all that come together, but man, I just hope everyone stays safe. It seems like it's going to be a long rebuild in certain parts of Florida, and that just sucks.
Again, our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Florida right now as Hurricane Ian is barreling through the state. But Drew, I'm going to go in a different direction here, and I'm going to go with the relevance of all-star games in the postseason. And we get a lot of questions of, hey, what is the importance of in terms of the evaluation process of these all-star games? And I think a lot of people really don't understand that. And you might say, hey, why are you talking about this right now at the end of September? Because, well, right there, what you see, the guy who is second in terms of Big Ten pass rusher grades is Denied Dennis Sutton, and a guy for us who was barely in the top 100 as he came into San Antonio earlier this year for the Adidas All-American Bowl. And it was a guy who had a heck of a week, and for us to be able to see him to perform at such a high level against the elite of the elite in that setting, not only during the All-Star game itself, but that entire week really showed us what type of player and where Denied Dennis Sutton was heading. And the up arrow was apparent for everybody to see there that week. He ends up being coined a 5-star there late in the process for us at 24/7 Sports. I think we're pretty happy that we did that, but also relevant for us is because we have a rankings release coming up in a couple weeks in the middle of October. And I think a lot of people get frustrated when they say, well, how much has changed since the last time that you guys have updated things? Well, senior film in between the all-star process as well and what we've seen in the offseason, it is a fluid process for 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Their bodies are still developing. These are guys that are still maturing on the field. And for us, it always kind of validates or vindicates us when a guy like Denied Dennis Sutton is able to carry over that performance of what we've seen later in his senior year to see what he did in San Antonio, in San Antonio in an all-star setting and see that carry over. I think that's always a big plus for us. But Drew, that's all I got today, my friend. I think that is a 49-minute show. That is our longest one. We better get off this because I think producer Jesse's going to have a word or two for us. But for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We will be back next week, Monday, 3 o'clock Eastern. And like I said, if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe, like, comment to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, and we'll see you next week.